Sometimes it's fun to look back at early incarnations of games that have turned into long-lived franchises. For me, one of those that I have the most nostalgia for is Street Fighter II. As we'll see in a minute, the manual for Street Fighter II on Super Nintendo has some art that looks really odd from a modern perspective, and it has one enormous wrench thrown into the game's lore, but at the same time, the whole package is well done and shows a true respect for the game. The cover art is certainly eye-catching, primarily with Blanka looking like an absolute maniac, as he should. But a few things always bothered me just a little bit. Ryu's body looks almost superimposed, and they made Chun-Li's kick look extremely weak against Blanka here, who looks like he's just going to completely obliterate her. But these are minor nitpicks from a fan. The art absolutely catches your attention. The back has standard hype text, but one thing I find interesting is they really don't lean into the fact that this is a port of the arcade game, besides this one spot here. This is a little surprising because back in 1992, it was a huge deal that this game was getting ported to a home console. It seems obvious nowadays, but back then, kids like me didn't know if the Super Nintendo would be technically powerful enough to run Street Fighter II, so it just wasn't a sure thing to us. Here's the cartridge. And let's go ahead and get into the manual. About halfway through, we get character bios and special moves, and I really do enjoy all of this, but most of the character art looks awkward. Why does Ryu's face look like that? And what is this stupid pose? But here's the best part. Remember how I mentioned the lore situation? It happens in this first sentence. A student of Master Shenglong, Ryu has developed into a pure warrior. Here's why that sentence is a big deal. The name Shenglong originally appeared in the arcade game in a victory quote from Ryu. You must defeat Shenglong to stand a chance. However, Shenglong was actually a mistranslation. It was supposed to be simply a reference to Ryu's Dragon Punch. This mistranslation essentially turned into a long-running myth/prank. There were all these rumors about how Shenglong was unlockable if you did certain wild things in the game, and eventually even Capcom themselves kind of picked up on this and started playing into it a little bit. So, back to the line here, I don't know if its inclusion in the manual was a mistake, or if it was simply part of Capcom feeding into the Shenglong mystery some more. Anyway, let's flip through the others. It's nice that the manual tells you how to perform the special moves because, again, being used to playing the arcade version, back then we were conditioned to having to find special move lists in magazines or strategy guides, so this was appreciated, although by this point many of us had simply memorized every move in the game anyway. Here in Ken's bio, we get another mention of Shenglong. But look at how awkward Ken looks, just like Ryu. Also, Ken kinda gets the shaft here because the special move illustrations are clearly images of Ryu just used again. Chun-Li's bio has some actual legitimate lore that fans are familiar with, as it says she's been secretly tracking an underground operation called Shadaloo. Here's Zangief, and the only thing odd about his bio is that his weight, 256 pounds, seems about 100 pounds off from what it should be. And finally, Dhalsim's bio is weird because it barely hints at his most blatantly prominent attribute, which is that he can stretch his limbs to unnatural lengths. Instead, it makes him sound like the least threatening fighter ever, focusing on how he's patient and does yoga. Aside from the manual, there's a Nintendo Power Form, the Consumer Precautions booklet, and this flyer for Capcom games. I think the only other thing worth looking at here is the flyer. These guys are pretty cool. If you signed yourself and 2 friends up for the Capcom Craze Club, they'd send you a free hip pack, which looked basically like these, except they had the Street Fighter II logo on them. I was very tempted to use this video as an excuse to buy one for myself off eBay, but the only one I could find is listed for $150, and I had a little bit of trouble justifying that. And I already have an awesome Game Boy one anyway. Street Fighter II is the most influential fighting game of all time. The series has done a lot in the 30 plus years since this entry came out, so it's funny seeing some of the art that probably wouldn't pass today. But even with some of the awkward stuff like that, what's also fun to me as a fan of the game is to look back and see that Capcom clearly showed respect for fans of the game and put in the effort to give us a little something extra to go with an already great game.